A victory by Israel establishes the perception, if not the reality, of U.S. global dominance. We're involved, Steve. We're involved. We provide intelligence capabilities, certainly to Israel. We provide all kinds of weapon systems. We provide all kinds of training support. So China, that's what I want your audience to understand. We have to allow Israel to finish the job. It will allow the United States to fully shift to focusing on China. So whatever the regime is that rises up out of the ashes, if we have a positive relationship with that regime, that really benefits the United States of America, particularly against China, and it weakens China.
A retired U.S. general who served as national security advisor for Donald Trump in his first term as U.S. president has come out and admitted that the United States is deeply involved in the war on Iran, that the goal of the U.S. and Israel is to overthrow Iran's government, and that the ultimate target of this joint U.S.-Israeli war on Iran is in fact China, that the U.S. wants to isolate and encircle China in a new Cold War. And this general stated clearly that what the United States seeks is, quote, global dominance. This was all spelled out by Michael Flynn, or Mike Flynn, a U.S. general who helped to oversee the U.S. wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. In the Barack Obama administration, he was appointed the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA, which is the U.S. military's main intelligence agency. And then in Donald Trump's first term in 2017, Flynn served as the U.S. National Security Advisor, the head of Trump's National Security Council. And all of this was stated very clearly by General Mike Flynn in an interview he did with Steve Bannon. Now, Bannon was one of the most important figures in Trump's first presidential term. Bannon served as the chief strategist of the White House, and Bannon was CEO of Donald Trump's 2016 presidential campaign. And today, Steve Bannon has a right-wing talk show he calls his War Room, and Bannon's War Room brought on Flynn, and he said very clearly that the U.S. government is involved in this war on Iran, that the U.S. is providing Israel with intelligence and weapons and training and other forms of support, and that this is a joint U.S.-Israeli war.
I got to ask you, as a former national security advisor to the president, how do you interpret his answer when he was asked point blank about getting involved more in what I call the Persian War, sir?
Yeah, I mean, we're involved, Steve, and people need to understand that we've been in the Middle East my entire life, my entire military career. So we have to stop this being involved. We're involved. We provide intelligence capabilities, certainly to Israel and to many of the other countries. We provide all kinds of weapon systems. We provide all kinds of training support. You know, my advice would be to the president to, continue to do the things that he's doing, which is really to continue to provide the types of capabilities and particularly intelligence capabilities, but other things to Israel.
U.S. General Mike Flynn went on, and in this interview, he said that Israel is fighting on behalf of the West as a whole, of so-called Western civilization.
Israel is fighting their war, and we are, in fact, supporting it. And it's really protecting Western civilization.
Flynn is also a very extreme figure politically. He is a Christian nationalist who argues that the U.S. government should be based on religion, that there should not be separation of church and state. And he has proudly declared that conservatives in the U.S. are waging what he calls a, quote, spiritual war, end quote. In other words, a holy war. And this is an idea that is shared by Pete Hegseth, who is serving currently as defense secretary in Donald Trump's second term. Hegseth is a former Fox News host, and in 2020, Hegseth published a book titled American Crusade, in which he proudly said that conservatives in the U.S. are waging a holy war. He used that term, and he said that the targets of this new crusade, this new holy war, are China, which he constantly calls communist China, as well as the international left and Islam, and in particular, Iran. So these are very extreme ideas that are common throughout the U.S. government and the U.S. military. Again, Pete Hegseth is now overseeing the U.S. military as the defense secretary. And although these top figures in the Trump administration are very extreme politically, they're far-right Christian nationalists, in Europe, the so-called enlightened centrists in Europe, they also share basically these same views. And the leader of Germany, the country that committed some of the worst crimes in history just 80 years ago, the leader of Germany gave a speech in which he said that Israel is doing our, quote, dirty work, end quote, on behalf of the West. Those were the words of Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz, that Israel is doing the dirty work of the West by waging war on Iran. And Donald Trump himself has boasted that the U.S. government is directly involved in this war on Israel. On his Twitter copy website, Truth Social, Trump boasted that, quote, we now have complete and total control of the skies over Iran, end quote. He said we, as in the United States, controls the skies over Iran, he claims. And he boasted that Israel is using American-made, conceived, and manufactured stuff, talking about U.S. weapons, in order to bomb Iran. And the Wall Street Journal has reported that Trump personally approved plans for the U.S. military to directly attack Iran, to bomb Iran with U.S. planes, and the U.S. military is simply waiting for Trump to give the order. And the U.S. president was very clear about what he wants. On Truth Social, he tweeted, quote, unconditional surrender, end quote, demanding that the Iranian government completely give up, surrender its sovereignty to the U.S. empire. And the goal of the U.S. is regime change, to overthrow the Iranian government and to install a puppet regime. This is exactly what the CIA did in 1953 when the U.S. government backed a coup that overthrew Iran's democratically elected prime minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, and installed the Shah, a king, a monarch, a dictator who was propped up by the United States for decades from 1953 until the Iranian Revolution in 1979. And ever since that revolution, Washington has been desperate to try to overthrow the Iranian government and put in power another puppet regime. And Michael Flynn, the former national security advisor under Trump, this retired general, admitted in this interview that he did with Steve Bannon that the U.S. wants to have a pro-Western regime in Iran also because it would weaken China.
This is really important. A positive U.S. relationship with an Iranian regime. So whatever the regime is that rises up out of the ashes, if we have a positive relationship with that regime, that really benefits the United States of America, particularly against China, and it weakens China.
General Mike Flynn then emphasized that if the U.S. and Israel can overthrow Iran's government, then the U.S. empire can focus all of its resources and energy on containing China in the new Cold War.
We have to allow Israel to finish the job that when it does, as it is in the midst of finishing this job, and it's going to take a little bit, it will allow the United States to fully shift to focusing on China.
In this interview, Donald Trump's former chief strategist Steve Bannon pointed out that the reason that Mike Flynn was appointed the national security advisor under Trump in his first term is because they were focusing on preparing for war on China.
One of the basic philosophies we had, and the reason, quite frankly, you were chosen, given your expertise in this area, was the pivot to Asia.
And this actually goes back to the Barack Obama administration and the declaration of the so-called pivot to Asia, which really means pivot to war on China. The U.S. wanted to move some of its resources and troops out of West Asia, the so-called Middle East, and move those to East Asia to prepare for war on China. And listen here, where they say very clearly that it's all about China, 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 as Flynn put it.
Remember, one of the biggest things was to pivot to Asia, and we still right now we've got China. We've got the Nimitz carrier strike group is coming through the Straits of Malacca from the South China Sea, just
and
like
that's
that is a young sailor.
That's not just one aircraft carrier. For the people that don't know, that's not just one aircraft carrier. It's a battle group. It is a shitload of ships, submarines, aircraft. that, I think that's going to put
Destroyers.
us at about what they call, three groups now in the Middle East. We need to be focused on the principal 21st century adversary, and I'll call him an adversary, and that's China. So when we talk about pivot to the Pacific, which you go back 15, 20 years, I mean, this is an area of expertise that I've been paying attention to for a long, long time.
He's talking about the pivot out of the Middle East, sir, to actually confront the existential threat to the country, the Chinese Communist Party. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so China. That's what I want your audience to understand.
General Mike Flynn also pointed out that the U.S. wants to install a pro-Western regime in Iran in order to ally with India as part of the strategy to encircle China, because China is a close ally of Pakistan. So what the U.S. has tried to do is to use India as part of the so-called Indo-Pacific strategy to divide the global south, to divide organizations like BRICS, and to encircle China with pro-U.S. regimes.
This is much more geopolitical. If we have an Iran that is closer to the West and closer to the United States of America, then we can have an Iran that is closer to India, okay? India. And that's why we call it the Indo-Pacific Basin, Steve. So the Indo-Pacific Basin this century, we're already into the third decade of this century, is the defining component. The Indo-Pacific Basin is the defining piece of geography for the remainder of this century. And if we don't deal with China, and they're the wolf inside the hen house. I said this the other day on your show. China is all over our stuff here inside the United States of America. They're everywhere.
This is a strategy going back to the Barack Obama administration, when India had a new right-wing pro-US leader who came to power, Narendra Modi of the far-right BJP, which is a Hindu nationalist party. Historically, India had been ruled by the left-leaning Congress Party, which during the first Cold War had been relatively pro-Soviet, had very good relations with the Soviet Union. But after the first Cold War, over time, India leaned more toward the center. And then especially when BJP and Modi came to power, they moved more and more into the pro-US, pro-Western camp. Modi and BJP are very anti-Muslim, they're very Islamophobic, and they're also very pro-Israel. Modi has formed a close relationship and friendship with Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And in fact, the main opposition party in India, the left-leaning Congress Party, which originally, by the way, when India co-founded BRICS, it was under the left-leaning Congress Party, not under Modi and the BJP. Well, Congress publicly condemned Modi for allying with Israel so strongly as Israel is attacking Iran, which historically has had good relations with India. Iran also officially became a member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or the SCO. And members of the SCO include China, Russia, Iran, and also India and Pakistan and Kazakhstan and several other Central Asian republics. This is a very important organization for Eurasian integration. And the SCO has been speaking out against the U.S. war on Iran. In a statement on the 14th of June, the day after Israel started the war on Iran, the SCO stated that it, quote, strongly condemns the military strikes carried out by Israel, end quote. It condemned these as, quote, aggressive actions against civilian targets, including energy and transport infrastructure, which have resulted in civilian casualties, end quote. And it denounced these as, quote, a gross violation of international law and the United Nations Charter. They constitute an infringement on Iran's sovereignty, end quote. So from that statement, it looked like Eurasia was speaking with a very clear voice in denouncing this U.S.-Israeli war. However, for years now, the U.S. has been trying to divide the SCO, just like how the U.S. has been trying to divide BRICS. And after the SCO released the statement, the Ministry of External Affairs of India published a statement that distanced itself from the joint statement published by the SCO. So the U.S. empire has had some success in dividing Global South-led institutions like BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the SCO. And this is why the US has tried to rebrand the Asia-Pacific region as the Indo-Pacific region, allying with India and the Philippines and Japan and South Korea against China as part of a strategy of encirclement in the new Cold War. And the ultimate goal, above all, is global dominance. This was admitted by General Mike Flynn. He said the US empire wants global dominance, and if the US can succeed in overthrowing Iran's government, it would help to reestablish US imperial hegemony.
A victory by Israel establishes the perception, if not the reality, of U.S. global dominance and certainly Israeli dominance in that region.
So this is about imperialism. This is an attempt by the U.S. empire to impose its will on West Asia, the so-called Middle East, and then to expand across into East Asia to encircle and contain China in the new Cold War. This is exactly what I argued in another video, which I will link to in the description below, in which I outlined the various goals that the U.S. has in this joint U.S.-Israeli war on Iran, including asserting U.S. hegemony over West Asia, destroying the anti-colonial axis of resistance, colonizing all of historic Palestine, weakening or even overthrowing the Iranian government, scaring other countries in the region that want to move away from the US and the dollar, preserving the petrodollar system, ensuring global demand for the US dollar, destabilizing BRICS, dividing the global south, disrupting the multipolar project, and breaking apart the Iran-Russia-China partnership with the goal of isolating Beijing. Again, if you want to check out that video, I will link to it in the description below. But after I published that analysis, this video clip surfaced of Mike Flynn, this retired US general who oversaw the US National Security Council, essentially admitting that my analysis was correct, that the war on Iran is not just about Iran, it's not just about Israel, it's about maximizing the power of the US empire. So on that note, I'm going to conclude. I am Ben Norton. I am the editor-in-chief of Geopolitical Economy Report. I want to thank everyone for joining me today. Please like and subscribe. Please share this. I will see you all next time.